Welcome back to the channel. I've finally tackled the rear corner that I've been putting off for a long time, and not only that, I've done it all the way from the inside out. So let's get right into the video. If you look here, oh god, this too. This is probably gonna take off this corner and then fix this stuff. So take off the rear corner, I did. And fix this stuff, I did most of that in the last episode. But now we're faced with new challenges that, after cleaning up the area, I found more rust than I anticipated. Here and here was actually about as thin as paper, and I decided to start cutting it out. Now in the beginning, I wanted to keep as much of the original metal as possible, as I usually like to do because, well, the more metal you cut, the more you have to fabricate. But unfortunately, there was a nest in there, and I had to keep cutting. At this point, it was starting to become clear that I wasn't going to be able to just make small patches to fix this up. I found more nests inside, I looked deeper, and I found even more leaves. These leaves hold moisture, cause rusting, and I decided, well, I'm gonna have to cut out this entire section and find a way to create a replacement panel, which you will see later on in the episode. I decided to get this other piece of rusty metal here that was on the side, the inside of that front piece of the fender lip, just so that I could have all the rock cut out and I could fabricate it all as one piece. Sprayed some Osfo inside, got it cleaned up, and then it was time to move on to a piece that I did have, which is this rear fender piece that you can buy at Heritage Parts Center. I used my favorite aircraft stripper Ultra to get the paint off, and boy, it's always so satisfying to just see paint come right off. This is also the reason that you don't want to just paint over this stuff. It's not really etched to the surface well. It was now time for some out with the old and in with the new, and fitting this part was relatively easy as it was a good quality reproduction panel. I did have to patch this little area that had some pinholes. I'm trying to get rid of all the rust possible as I go along. It would have been possible to weld to the metal that was there, but I could tell that this rust was planning to come back, especially considering that what if a squirrel decides to make a nest in there again? Although hopefully there are no squirrels living in my garage. With the rear fender so beautifully fit and ground down, it was time to get on to the fabrication portion of this repair. Now, if you haven't seen Brandon's VW Bus channel, he's the one that inspired me to attempt to fix my own panel like this. And well, it's not very hard. You already have the tools for metalworking, and you can sand wood with those tools and do it all in the same garage. I don't even have to go to my dad's garage and use all of his tools for this. Shout out my dad. As you can see, I used the old pieces to make this template, ground it down into the wood, and test fit the pieces that I had cut out. They seemed to fit well, so it was time to attach my metal to the wood. I do this by just drilling out some holes, screwing it in, and then you get ready for the best arm pump of your life, because you're going to be hammering for quite some time. Yes, I do have an air hammer now, but I don't have an attachment I could do this with yet, so, you know, it was down to Pound Town. And wow, is that not beautiful? I mean, yeah, it's got hammer marks on it, but no one's gonna see this repair. And the most important part is that it fits well. And you may be asking yourself, if no one's gonna see this repair, then why not just weld in a flat piece of metal? And yes, I did consider that, but if you have this correct curvature here, you can actually weld it across the entire area. And the way I see it is this will prevent it from rusting in the future. With that repair out of the way, we can move on to the engine bay tin restoration part. And yes, you can buy this part at Heritage Parts Center. Don't forget to use code Vangabonders10 at checkout for 10% off. Thank you, Heritage Parts Center, for helping support the channel. If you're familiar with this channel, you're probably asking yourself, what's the point of fixing this part of the engine bay if you're going to be doing a Subaru swap? And I have also thought this before. But something about having an engine bay that looks completely stock, and at some point, thousands of years in the future, if I decided to put a Type 4 engine back in there, well, I'd be able to use all the tins and the seal and be able to have what the purists call a stock looking bus. And also, I think it looks good the way that VW designed it. The lines in the engine bay just flow well together, so in the end, fixing it the way that looks stock is actually going to end up looking better. It is now time for the part that you've all been waiting for, which is getting that rear corner welded in. Doing this took a lot longer than I had anticipated, and that's mostly because this is a Clocker Home replacement panel, and Clocker Home is the only one who makes these corners. Unfortunately, I did cut out this corner over a year ago, so I don't have the old piece in order to use as a reference, so I had to take a lot of measurements, and I cut a little bit oversized. That's so that later I can go ahead and grind down any extra and I don't end up with a piece that's too small, because that is always the worst feeling ever. Now, of course, with any of these pieces that have this crappy black transport primer, I like to use my Aircraft Stripper Ultra in order to get it down to bare metal. And it's really easy, just put it on, leave it for a little bit, and then once it has sat in, the paint comes off no problem. Now, I like to get these panels sanded on the inside with 60 grit while they're off, because it's just easier to get everything sanded down when it's not attached. Once it's prepared and sanded for epoxy primer, I can get to the actual fitment of the panel. But for those of you with keen eyesight, you may have noticed that I left a couple of these spots unwelded, so we're gonna have to tackle that before we move on, because I don't want to leave any open unwelded seams behind my panels. For some reason, I always leave these annoying parts for last, but it was easy to do, and once it was complete, I could move on to actually fitting and flap disking the panel. You've seen me do this before in previous episodes. It's one of my favorite techniques now. You cut it a little bit oversized, and then you use the flappy disc in order to grind off little bits of metal at a time. That way you could get a good fit all the way around, and you end up with a panel that fits perfectly. Now, moving on to this rear fender piece, you can see that it's got these stamping marks. Once again, it is a Clocker Home piece, so it's not the best quality, but it's nothing that an anvil and hammer can't fix. Thankfully, I've seen someone do this on the Samba before, or I've read it on the Samba. If not, I probably wouldn't have thought to do this, but it ends up coming out pretty straight, and that's going to give us that nice stock looking seam that we're looking for. A lot of people say you shouldn't cut your replacement panels all the way down to the seam, because it's near impossible to get a nice straight seam with these replacement pieces, but if you put a lot of work into it, you can get it to work. As you can see, this corner had this nice bulge in it because, well, Clocker Home, of course, and I don't have a shrinker or a stretcher, so I decided to just cut the bulge out, and once it was cut, make sure not to touch your hot metal. I could get to using my hammer and dolly to smooth it out. I decided to fit my pieces together outside of the bus to make sure that I was going to get a straight seam. Thankfully I did this because it was going to be very difficult to get this to all line up straight if it was already installed in the bus. So I took my time bending, shaping. I had to actually modify this Fender piece. This is because it kind of curved out for some reason. I don't know why. Clocker home. Got it hammered into shape, welded up that little seam that I had to cut into it, and then things were starting to look like they would fit just about right. Once I was happy with the way things fit, I could move on to getting that Fender piece cut to shape. Once again, I'm using the technique of cutting it slightly oversized and little by little grinding it down until I had the perfect fit. Now what I'm trying to pay attention to here is making sure that my seam is all straight. And I know you hear me talk a lot about these seams, but trust me, they look weird when they're not straight. But with everything clamped in, it was looking perfect. But let's not forget to use that zinc primer, because anything that's behind metal that you're welding, metal on metal, must be coated in zinc primer. If not, it's gonna rust. Finally, we are moving on to my favorite part of the restoration. The end. Or well, my favorite part of the video. The end. Getting everything clamped up, looking straight, and well, tacking it into place. Of course, space your tacks apart. I've learned this the hard way. You really do want to take your time with welding things. If you try to move on too quickly or weld too quickly between your panels, they will start to warp and stretch and kind of bend. And then you're never going to get it to lay flat, and it's going to require a lot of filler. Now, I'm actually quite proud of how I got these pieces to fit together. It's probably the best that I've ever gotten any clocker home piece to fit. Now, this has come with many months of practice that I've had on working on the bus. And I must say, if you're looking into restoring your bus, just know that your first repairs compared to your last repairs are going to be very different. And in the end, you're going to wish you could go back and do the first repairs all over again. My best advice to this would be take your time from the beginning. Learn as much as you can from watching others. There are so many great content creators out there. I'm definitely not one of the best, but I've learned a lot along the way, and hopefully by watching my older videos to my newer videos, you can kind of see what I've learned and learn from my mistakes, as this is all just part of the enjoyment of restoring your bus or your vehicle or whatever you're working on. It's just learning, having fun, taking your time, and well, maybe a little brew here and there. But I'd like to thank all of you who have supported me for so long, who watch these videos, who leave comments, who have subscribed, who have just made me feel like it's worth it to make these videos. Thank you so much. I enjoy making them. I enjoy being able to be consistent on this project. And well, I'm reaching the end of the bodywork, and that is a huge milestone where I could finally get to moving on to the next step in the process, which is, well, getting the entire thing painted and then moving on to the engine, which is going to be a whole journey on its own. So thank you for watching, and well, I'll see you guys in the next one.